Okay, so get this. We're going deep into the world of Caribbean medical schools.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, and how they're actually, like, shaping healthcare, especially in the U.S.
I'm all ears.
You might be surprised to know, over half of all the primary care physicians, the ones practicing in the U.S. right now,
Wow.
they actually graduated from a Caribbean medical school.
Really?
Yeah, over 50%.
That's a lot more than I would have guessed.
So big chances are you've already seen a doctor who got their training in the Caribbean.
Huh. You're probably right.
So today we're using a recent academic article and a couple of other sources to kind of understand how this whole thing works. The complexities and the controversies around, the accreditation of Caribbean medical schools.
Yeah, because accreditation is important.
Exactly. That's what we're diving into.
I mean, it's supposed to be like a guarantee, right?
Right.
That future doctors are getting a good education.
A quality education.
But, what happens when that system, has problems, especially somewhere like the Caribbean?
Yeah, and that's what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah, it's a big issue
It is.
because it affects, all of us, the quality of healthcare we get.
For sure.
These schools are a major pipeline for doctors in the U.S.,
Huge.
especially in primary care.
Like we were saying, yeah.
And their role is just getting bigger.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So we're seeing an increase in the number of Caribbean-trained doctors,
Exactly.
but also their performance on these really important exams.
The USMLE, yeah.
Yeah. So what does that mean for credit?
Right.
Does that mean it's getting stricter or maybe more lenient? What's happening there?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Oh,
There's been this explosion of accrediting agencies in recent years.
really?
And not all of them are, the same quality.
Right, sure.
So this is what the authors of this article are calling an uncontrolled marketplace.
An uncontrolled marketplace for accrediting future doctors.
Yeah,
This sounds a little bit scary, honestly.
it can be.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? Like, what makes this marketplace uncontrolled, and why should we be worried?
So think of it this way. If you're medical school, right,
Okay.
and you're having trouble meeting the really high standards of a good accreditor, you might start looking for a different agency, one that's, well, maybe willing to look the other way a little.
Oh, I see.
That's the danger of this uncontrolled marketplace.
Yeah.
It creates this incentive for a race to the bottom,
Oh, that makes sense.
Quality becomes less important than making money.
So instead of focusing on keeping the standards high and making sure these doctors are really prepared,
Right.
some of these accreditors might, lower the bar to get more schools to sign up with them.
Yeah, essentially.
That's a red flag.
Yeah, it is a big concern.
So it sounds like some schools are choosing a less, rigorous accreditation process to, I don't know, maybe save time or money,
It's possible.
even if it means sacrificing the quality of education.
Yeah, and this is where the idea of cross-border accreditation gets really important.
Cross-border accreditation. I've never heard of that. What's that?
So basically, it means that agencies from outside the Caribbean,
Okay.
they're the ones accrediting schools in the region.
Oh, so someone from, I don't know, Europe coming in and saying, yep, this school's good.
That's the idea. And the authors use examples of agencies from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan,
Wow, that's fair.
accrediting schools in Curacao and Dominica.
I mean, it's kind of weird, right? Why would a school in the Caribbean want to be accredited by somebody halfway across the world?
It's a good question.
Is it just about convenience? Or is there something more going on?
Well, that's exactly what the authors are worried about.
Okay.
They're saying some schools might be doing this on purpose. Not because it's convenient, but because these faraway accreditors might be easier to please. Maybe they can avoid the stricter rules they'd face from someone closer to home.
So they're shopping around for the easiest accreditation.
Kind of, yeah. It's like they're getting accredited, ahead of actually providing a good education.
That's a problem.
And they give some examples in this article that are really, really concerning.
Like what?
Well, there's this case of a school in Curacao.
Okay.
And they were trying to get accredited by an agency in Kyrgyzstan. But here's the thing. At that time, this agency wasn't even allowed to work in the Caribbean.
Wait, so they were trying to get accredited by someone who wasn't even supposed to be accrediting schools there?
Exactly.
That seems like a huge problem.
It is.
Why would a school go through all that trouble to get, approved by someone who's not even supposed to be doing that?
Well, and it gets even more complicated.
All right.
This agency, apparently, they were offering really fast accreditation.
No.
And they even, held workshops for the school.
Workshops.
Yeah, teaching them how to fill out the self-study documents, the stuff they need for accreditation.
So, like, they were helping them pass the test.
It seems that way, and this close relationship, it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
are they really focused on quality, or are they just trying to get another client?
That's a conflict of interest, isn't it? It's a big deal.
It is a big deal. And then there's another case in the article.
Okay.
This one's about a school in Dominica,
Mm-hmm.
and they got accredited by an agency in Kazakhstan. But get this.
What?
They hadn't even had their first class of students yet.
They got accredited before they even had students.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is pretty wild, right?
No.
It makes you question, how thorough these evaluations really are.
For sure.
And whether they're actually focused on making sure the education is good.
It sounds like a real mess, honestly.
It can be, and these examples, they really show that the system, or maybe the lack of a good system, it can be taken advantage of. And that's why the authors are saying someone needs to step in and fix it.
Okay, so we've got a problem.
Yeah.
But what's the solution? Like, how do we actually make sure that these schools are being held to, real standards?
Right.
No matter where the accreditor is from.
That's the key.
What can be done?
Well, the authors have a few ideas, and they think the ECFMG, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, they need to be the ones to, really push for change.
Oh, interesting. Why them?
They're the ones who evaluate international medical grads, the ones who want to practice in the U.S.
Right.
So they have a lot of power.
They hold the keys to the kingdom.
Kind of.
Exactly. If they say, hey, we need stricter standards, people are going to listen.
Makes sense. So it's not just about setting rules. It's about having the power to, enforce them.
Right. And they have that power.
So how would that actually work? What would a more, a tougher system look like in real life?
Well, imagine, every accrediting agency, no matter where they are.
They have to prove that they're serious about high standards before they can even come to the Caribbean.
Okay.
So you need clear rules about who gets recognized. You got to really check how they do things.
Right.
And make sure they're actually doing their job properly.
So no more just showing up and saying, you're good, just because the school is on a nice island.
Exactly. The goal is to make sure every school that's accredited has really earned it.
That makes sense.
It's about protecting medical education, and in the end, it's about protecting patients.
It's a good vision.
I think so.
But, things like this, they take time to change.
They do.
Especially with big organizations. So while we wait for the ECFMG to do its thing,
yeah,
what advice would you give to, a student who's thinking about going to a Caribbean medical school right now?
Oh, that's a great question.
How can they, figure out this whole accreditation thing?
My best advice is be an informed consumer,
Don't just believe everything you read on a brochure.
Exactly. Don't just pack your bags because the website looks nice.
Right. Do your homework.
Yeah. Start by checking that WFME directory.
The one we talked about earlier.
Yeah. See if that accrediting agency is even recognized.
Okay. What else?
Then, really dig in. Look into their history, what their standards are, how they do their reviews.
And, how they deal with conflicts of interest, right?
Absolutely. It's like buying a house. You wouldn't just sign the papers without checking it out first, right?
No way. Got to get an inspection, make sure the foundation is solid.
Exactly. It's the same with medical school. You're investing in your future.
It's a big investment.
It is. So look at the curriculum, who the teachers are, how many students graduate.
And how they do on the USMLE.
Especially the USMLE, that shows you how well they're actually preparing students.
For the real world.
Yeah, for being a doctor.
And accreditation is just one part of it, right?
It is. You should also look at the school's reputation, what kind of resources they have.
The whole experience, basically.
Yeah, the whole package, make sure it feels right.
Good big decision.
It is a huge decision.
It's your future as a doctor.
Exactly. And remember, if something seems off or too good to be true,
yeah,
it probably is. Trust your gut. And don't be afraid to ask questions.
That's a great advice for students, but let's zoom out for a second.
Okay.
Why should, people who aren't becoming doctors care about this?
Right.
How does this affect regular people, patients, you and me?
Well, think about it. The quality of medical education, it directly affects the kind of healthcare we all get.
Yeah, that's true.
We all deserve to know that our doctors, they got a good education, that they're held to high standards.
It's about trust, right?
Exactly. It's about trust and accountability.
It's like, I don't know, going to a mechanic. You want to trust that they know what they're doing?
Yeah, that they're not going to make things worse.
Exactly.
We're trusting doctors with our health, with our lives.
That's huge.
It is. So they need to have the knowledge, the skills to actually take care of us.
And that starts with their education.
Absolutely. So this isn't just some, like, theoretical debate.
No.
This has real consequences for everyone.
So we all need to be paying attention.
We do. And we need to be talking about it.
Absolutely.
And by being informed, we can actually push for a healthcare system that's better.
That's focused on quality and making sure everyone's doing their job right.
Exactly.
It's crazy how something like accreditation, which sounds so technical,
I know.
it actually has such a big impact on our lives.
It shows you how connected everything is in healthcare.
Yeah.
Every decision matters.
Plus, what happens next with this whole accreditation thing? I mean, what can we expect to see going forward?
That's a good question. And to be honest, we don't know for sure. The authors, they're calling for a big change.
Yeah.
Especially with these cross-border agencies. Whether anyone listens to them, well, we'll have to wait and see.
It's a story that's still being written.
It is.
And it'll be interesting to see how everyone reacts, the ECFMG, the WFME, all the accreditors.
They all have a part to play.
Okay, so we were just talking about those, specific examples of questionable accreditation.
Yeah, the ones that really stood out.
Yeah, what was, like, the most concerning thing for you?
I think for me, it's that disconnect,
Disconnect
between the accrediting agency and the place where the school actually is.
Oh,
Like when you have someone from Kyrgyzstan trying to evaluate a school in the Caribbean, it makes you wonder, do they really understand what it's like there?
Yeah, the unique challenges, the whole context.
Exactly. It's like trying to play baseball with the rules of soccer.
Yeah, it just doesn't work.
And the worry is that these, like, cross-border agencies, they might not get those nuances, so maybe their standards are too easy.
Or maybe they're just not relevant to the Caribbean at all.
Exactly. And that's where that race to the bottom idea gets really scary.
Right, because if a school can't meet the standards of a good accreditor who knows the Caribbean, they might just go find someone easier, even if it means the quality suffers.
And the students suffer.
It's like going to a doctor who's known for giving out pills without even asking what's wrong.
Yeah, it might seem easy at first.
Convenient.
But it could end up really bad.
Long term, yeah.
And the authors, they give some good evidence for this.
Like what?
Remember that school in Curacao, the one that was trying to get accredited by that agency in Kyrgyzstan?
Yeah, the one that wasn't even supposed to be working there.
Exactly. It really seems like they were trying hard to find someone who wouldn't look too closely.
Like, just rubber stamp them and move on?
Kind of, yeah.
And then it gets even worse because this agency, they were offering, like, super fast accreditation.
Expedited, they call it.
And they even, like, taught the school how to fill out the paperwork.
It's like they were coaching them to pass the test.
Yeah, this is right.
It really undermines the whole process.
And the authors are saying this kind of close relationship creates a conflict of interest.
Absolutely. It's a big problem.
And it's not just that one case, right? There was the one in Dominica, too.
Oh, yeah, that one's even crazier.
Where the school got accredited before they even had students.
It makes you wonder if they even looked at the school.
Yeah, did they even visit the campus?
Who knows?
It just shows how this system can be, like, manipulated.
It's a system that's easy to exploit.
And that's why the authors are saying someone needs to step in and fix it, like, now.
They're really calling for action.
So what can they do? What are the solutions?
They have a few ideas. They want the ECFMG, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, to get involved.
Why them specifically?
Well, they're the ones who decide if international medical grads can practice in the U.S.
Oh, right. They have a lot of influence.
Exactly. So if they say we need better accreditation, people will listen.
It makes sense.
So they have a few suggestions. First, they want clearer guidelines from the WFME.
The World Federation for Medical Education.
Yeah, the ones who recognize accrediting agencies.
Okay.
They want a more standardized process, especially for these agencies that are working across borders.
So no more just setting up shop and handing out accreditations.
Exactly. It needs to be more controlled.
More rigorous.
Right. And they also want stricter oversight of the whole accreditation process.
Okay, so like checking in more often, making sure everyone's doing their job.
Yeah, and making sure those checks are thorough, not just a quick glance.
So really making sure the agencies are sticking to those high standards.
Exactly. And finally, they want the ECFMG to push for a much more careful approach to evaluating those cross-border accreditations.
Okay, like what kind of things?
Well, they want agencies to prove they really understand the place where they're working.
So if you're accrediting a school in the Caribbean, you need to know about the Caribbean.
Exactly. You need to know the challenges, the opportunities, the whole context.
And they need to have qualified people doing the evaluations, right?
Absolutely. People who are experts in that specific region.
And they also need stricter rules about conflicts of interest.
Yeah, no more coaching schools to pass the test.
It sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It's a big overhaul of the whole system.
But if it means better accreditation, then it's worth it, right?
Absolutely. It's about making sure that accreditation actually means something.
That it's a real guarantee of quality.
Exactly. So patients can trust that their doctors got a good education.
That's a powerful message.
It is, and it all comes back to trust and accountability.
And that brings us to our listeners.
Yeah, what can they do?
How can they be a part of this, this push for a better system?
The biggest thing is be informed, be engaged. If you're thinking about a Caribbean medical school, do your research.
Don't just take the school's word for it.
Exactly. Look into that accrediting agency, ask questions, and trust your gut.
Be an advocate for your own health.
Exactly. And if you're passionate about this, talk about it. Share this information.
Yeah, let's start a conversation about quality medical education and accountability.
Absolutely. We all have a role to play.
We do, and that's a good note to end on, for this part of our deep dive at least.
I agree.
We've learned a lot about Caribbean medical schools.
We have their impact, the challenges with accreditation,
And the need for change.
and most importantly, what we can do about it.
So stay tuned for the next part where we'll dig even deeper into these issues.
We'll explore the potential solutions and what the future might hold for this crucial part of the global healthcare landscape.
And until then, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, keep asking those tough questions.
They were talking about some pretty serious stuff.
Right, it's a big deal.
I mean, this whole idea of an uncontrolled marketplace for accreditation, that's scary.
Yeah, it is. It's like, who's watching the Watchmen,
Exactly, and that's why the authors of this article are calling for some serious changes.
Okay, so we've identified the problem, but what's the solution? How do we actually fix this? How do we make sure that Caribbean medical schools are being held to high standards, no matter where that accrediting agency is based?
Right. Right, and the authors, they have some pretty specific recommendations. They think the ECFMG, the Educational Commission for Foreign Medical Graduates, needs to step up and use its power to really push for change.
Okay, so they're putting a lot of faith in the ECFMG to drive this change.
Yeah, I mean, they make a good case for it, the ECFMG. They're the ones who evaluate international medical graduates, the ones who want to practice in the U.S. They essentially hold the keys to the kingdom.
Right, they have a lot of power.
Exactly. If they push for stricter accreditation standards, it's going to have a huge impact, like a ripple effect throughout the whole system.
Okay, so it's not just about setting standards. It's about having the authority to enforce them. But how do they actually make this happen? What does a more rigorous system look like in practice?
Well, imagine a world where every accrediting agency, no matter where they're based, has to prove their commitment to high standards before they can even set foot in the Caribbean.
Interesting.
This means establishing clear criteria for recognition, conducting thorough evaluations of their processes, and holding them accountable for their decisions.
So no more free passes, no more rubber stamping schools just because they happen to be located on a beautiful island?
Exactly. The goal is to level the playing field, make sure every accredited school has truly earned that stamp of approval. It's about protecting the integrity of medical education and ultimately the safety of patients.
That's a great vision, but change rarely happens overnight, especially when you're dealing with these big international organizations.
Yeah, it's a long game.
So while we wait for the ECFMG to, wield its influence, what advice would you give to medical students considering Caribbean schools right now? I mean, how can they navigate this potentially tricky accreditation landscape?
That's a really good question. And my advice would be become an informed consumer. Don't just take a school's word for it when they say they're accredited. Go the extra mile and do your research.
So don't just pack your bags and book a flight based on a glossy brochure.
Right. Precisely. Start by checking the WFMEA directory. Verify if the accrediting agency is even recognized.
Okay, that's a good first step.
But then dig a little deeper. Look into the agency's history, their standards, their review process, and how they handle potential conflicts of interest.
It's like buying a house. You wouldn't just sign on the dotted line without getting an inspection and checking the foundation, right?
That's a perfect analogy. You need to make sure the school you're investing in is built on a solid foundation of quality. Look at the curriculum, the faculty qualifications, graduation rates, and perhaps, most importantly, how their graduates perform on the USMLE exams.
Right, those USMLE scores, they're a pretty good indicator of how well a school is preparing its students for real-world practice, aren't they?
Absolutely. And while accreditation is important, it's only one piece of the puzzle. Students should also consider the school's reputation, its resources, its clinical training opportunities, and the overall learning environment.
It's a big decision. It's about your future as a doctor. You need to gather all the information you can.
Absolutely. And remember, if something feels off or too good to be true, it probably is. Don't be afraid to ask tough questions and trust your instincts.
All great advice. But let's zoom out for a moment and think about the bigger picture. Why should all of us, even those who aren't planning on becoming doctors, care about this issue? How does the accreditation of Caribbean medical schools impact the everyday lives of patients like you and me?
It's a good point. It's easy to think of this as just an academic issue, but it's not. It's about healthcare. It's about all of us.
Okay, I'm listening.
The quality of medical education, it has a direct impact on the quality of healthcare we all receive. We all deserve to know that the doctors treating us have received a solid education and are held to high standards.
It's about trust, right?
Yeah.
Like knowing that the person taking care of you knows what they're doing.
Exactly. It's about trust and accountability. It's like going to a mechanic. You want to be confident that they know what they're doing and aren't going to make things worse, right?
Yeah, you don't want them tinkering around under the hood if they don't know what they're doing.
Right. And it's the same with doctors. We entrust them with our health and well-being, so it's crucial that they're equipped with the knowledge and skills to provide safe and effective care. And that starts with ensuring they've received a quality education from a reputable institution.
So this isn't just an abstract academic debate. It has real-world consequences for all of us.
Absolutely. And that's why we need to be having these conversations, bringing these issues to light. By being informed and engaged, we can advocate for a healthcare system that prioritizes quality and accountability at every level.
It's a reminder that even something as seemingly technical as accreditation can have a huge impact on the quality of care we receive.
It really highlights how interconnected the healthcare system is. Every decision, from choosing a medical school to accrediting an institution, has consequences that ripple outward, ultimately affecting patients all over the world.
Okay, so what's next? What can we expect to see in the coming months and years?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The authors of the article we've been discussing, they're calling for a significant shift in how we approach accreditation, especially when it comes to these cross-border agencies.
Big change, yeah.
Yeah, whether those calls for change will be listened to, well, that remains to be seen.
It's a story that's still unfolding. It'll be interesting to see how the ECFMG, the WFME, and those individual accrediting agencies respond to all of this. It sounds like there's a lot of work to do.
There is, but it's important work. It's about making sure that everyone involved in medical education is committed to the highest standards.
And that patients can have confidence in the doctors who are treating them.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that medical education is truly preparing doctors for the challenges of the 21st century.
Now, speaking of those challenges, let's shift our focus back to those specific examples of questionable practices that we talked about earlier. You know, the ones that really raise some red flags.
Yeah.
Yeah, those specific examples, some of them are pretty shocking.
They were, and I think one of the most concerning things for me is this disconnect, you know? When you have agencies from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan evaluating schools in the Caribbean, it makes you wonder, do they really get it? Do they understand what it's like to run a medical school in that region?
Right, the challenges, the culture, the whole context.
Exactly. It's like trying to judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
Haha, yeah, it's just not a fair comparison.
And that's where I worry that these cross-border agencies, their standards might be too lenient, or maybe they're just not relevant to the Caribbean at all.
So it's not just about having high standards. It's about having standards that actually make sense for the place where the school is.
Exactly. And that feeds into that whole race to the bottom concern. If a school can't meet the standards of a good accreditor who knows the Caribbean, they might just shop around until they find someone who's easier on them, even if it means sacrificing quality.
It's like finding a doctor who's known for handing out prescriptions without even asking what's wrong.
Right. It might seem convenient at first, but it could have some serious consequences down the line.
And the authors of this article, they give some pretty compelling examples to back this up.
They do, like that case with the school in Curacao, the one that tried to get accredited by that agency in Kyrgyzstan that wasn't even authorized to operate in the Caribbean at the time.
Yeah, that one really stood out. It seems like they were bending over backwards to find an accreditor who might look the other way.
It does, and what's even more troubling is that this agency, they were offering expedited timelines for the accreditation process. They were even holding workshops to teach the school how to fill out the self-study documents.
So basically, they were coaching the school on how to pass the accreditation test, which raises some serious questions about their objectivity.
It does, it makes you wonder if they were more concerned with getting a client than with upholding standards.
And it's not an isolated incident either. Remember that other case from Dominica, where a school got accredited before they even had their first class of students?
I do. That was just mind-boggling. To give a school accreditation before they've even started operating, it just doesn't make sense.
It really undermines the whole idea of accreditation as a mark of quality.
It does, and those examples, they really highlight how vulnerable the system is to manipulation.
It shows that good intentions aren't enough. You need strong oversight and accountability to make sure the system works the way it's supposed to.
Absolutely, and that's why the authors are calling for urgent action. They believe the ECFMG needs to step in and address these concerns, use its influence to push for reforms that strengthen the accreditation process and protect the integrity of international medical education.
It's a tall order, but it sounds like it's necessary. So what can they actually do? What would these reforms look like?
They have a multi-pronged approach. First, they're calling for clearer guidelines from the WFME, the organization that recognizes these accrediting agencies. They want a more standardized and transparent process, especially for those agencies that are working across borders.
So no more free-for-all. Everyone needs to be playing by the same rules.
Exactly. They also recommend stricter oversight of the accreditation process itself, more frequent evaluations, more rigorous checks to make sure these agencies are actually doing their job.
So keeping a closer eye on things, making sure they're not cutting corners.
Right. And finally, they want the ECFMG to push for a much tougher approach to evaluating those cross-border accreditations. Agencies need to prove they understand the local context, they need to have qualified people on the ground, and they need stricter conflict of interest policies.
It sounds like a complete overhaul of the system, but if it leads to better accreditation, it's worth it.
It is. It's about making sure that accreditation really means something, that it's a reliable indicator of quality, and that patients can be confident that the doctors treating them have received a solid education.
That's a great goal, and it brings us back to our listeners. What can they do? How can they be a part of this push for a better system?
Well, as we said before, if you're considering a Caribbean medical school, do your research. Don't just take the school's word for it. Look into that accrediting agency. Ask tough questions.
Be an informed consumer. Be an advocate for your own health.
Exactly. And if you're passionate about this issue, spread the word. Talk to your friends and family. Share this information. Let's start a conversation about the importance of quality medical education and the need for a system that's accountable and transparent.
So we all have a role to play in shaping a better future for healthcare.
Absolutely. This deep dive has really highlighted the complexities of Caribbean medical school accreditation. It's a vital part of the global healthcare landscape, but it's also a system that needs our attention. It needs reform.
It's been an eye-opening conversation. We've learned a lot about the growing influence of these schools, the challenges they face, and the urgent need for change.
And we've explored the potential solutions, the steps we can take to make sure that accreditation truly means something, that it guarantees a quality education for future doctors.
We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and maybe even inspired you to get involved.
As always, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.